there's quite a number of things that they're going to be happening over the next number of years that I think will change the face of agriculture and will make it better. So what I'm sort of focusing on today, and why I've sort of been asked to come, is I suppose because of my background at Dunbia, and also the fact that I've been doing a Nuffield Scholarship this year on creating change in farming and driving change. So just a little bit of background on Dunbia to give you a bit of a feel for where we're coming from. It's a beef, lamb and pork processor in the UK. It's fairly large processor now, and we supply most of the major multiples, but we also supply many food service, many butchers, and a considerable proportion of our turnover is export as well. And all markets are important. And we're going to just touch on a number of those things. Now, that was a plane that I wasn't on, by the way. Yeah, I'm quite grateful for that. It is a French plane. I don't know if that has anything whatsoever to do with it. But the countries that I have had a bit of a look at as part of my Nuffield travel so far are New Zealand and Australia. Little bit of a visit to China, a considerable tour around the USA and Canada, and obviously quite a bit of stuff in the UK and Ireland. And hopefully there's a little bit more to come as well. But it's very interesting to get a sort of broad perspective of agriculture across the world, because people are doing things well everywhere, and it's really important to actually learn from them, as Alan said earlier on. Now, just a wee quick story, true story this actually, where a group of scientists had developed a new glass for windscreens of airliners. It may in fact have been this airliner, I don't know. But it was tested in a number of ways, and one of the things that was obviously being tested for was bird strike. And they brought a new machine in to test this. Having tested lots of other ways, they then brought this thing that fired chickens at the windscreen, really just to test it and see was it resistant. So they did this, they loaded this machine up, brought it in, and fired the chicken, and it was smashing through the windscreen, smashed through the captain's chair, and ended up in the bulkhead at the back of the plane. And they were understandably a little worried. And went back and actually wrote a detailed sort of report. This is what happened, this is what we did, etc., etc. And they wrote it to the manufacturer of this testing equipment. And they wrote back with 3 words that said was, thaw the chicken. Now, essentially, what we're doing today is thawing the chicken in truth, because you're going to come away from my talk going, well, there's nothing kind of really new there. And actually, in truth, there probably isn't. There's no rocket science here at all. There's just the aggregation, as I have seen as we go along, the aggregation of small details building into terrific performance. And that's a really, really key point that I want you to take away. You take nothing else away, take that away. Everything done well, no stone left unturned. And really wanting to see how we improve performance. So, a lot of the time we hear this term change. And what we actually mean by that, is actually we want somebody else or something else to change. But one of the points I'm talking about is taking responsibility for our own situation. And for our business, we have to change all the time. And that actually becomes true for your business as well. And there's a few questions that you need to be able to answer honestly to yourself before you even embark on this. Number 1, do you really need change? I suggest probably if you don't, there's a bit of a problem there anyway. But the second question is, do you actually really want it? Like, do you really want it? Because it's hard. And then what do you want to change to? And are you prepared for the pain of change? Because change is never easy. One of the things I have done is to go around talking to change specialists and educational psychologists and even headmasters and things, as I've been doing with Nuffield, and change is difficult. So are you prepared for it? And if you are prepared for it, how are you going to do it? So some very, very key points there. So, speaking like a true Northern Ireland man again, it's very easy to make sweeping statements from a point of absolutely no knowledge. I can do that all day, and then all you do is you shout down somebody who actually disagrees with you then. But it doesn't take you very far. And realistically, I put up a word there, prejudice. Prejudice exists in all sorts of ways. But actually, in farming, it almost exists sometimes as preconceived notions. I've thought about this, that's the answer, and why is nobody else doing it? And let me tell you something. When I just started driving, okay, I was a danger on the roads, but there were other difficulties as well. I once decided I was coming back from quite a long way away, and there was roadworks, and I thought, I know a better way. I knew that if I kept the television mast on my left, and I drove, it was taking me home. So that's what I did. And an hour and a half later, I arrived back where I started, having driven the whole way around the mountain. And the point being that one data point is not enough. One opinion formulated by yourself on the farm or in a business is not enough. You need lots of data points before you start to change, and lots of opinions, and it's really crucial that you do that. Trust in the supply chain starts with understanding the supply chain. That's a core point. And the second thing is, or the last point there is that oversimplification then is not the answer, because I hope you got the message this morning that there's no simple answers. As you look at what was presented this morning, you know, that was a brilliant synopsis of China, but did it even actually really scratch the surface? Good synopsis from Alan there about what to do in your business. Did it really scratch the surface? What I'm doing, will this scratch the surface? Probably not. It's complicated. Very, very complicated. So what do we actually need to understand? The answer to that is everything. But we can't. So you focus on the key points that actually will frame your business and how you're going forward. So understand the key points. That's absolutely crucial. So it starts with the customer, and I was glad Alan really emphasised that. Now, I spent an awfully long time on the internet looking for a photograph of a farmer shopping. Yeah, I didn't succeed. But essentially, breaking it down very simply, what does a customer want or a consumer want? Well, they want a product that's good value and safe. It's got great appearance, it's tender and it's flavourful. It's consistent. It's always the same, they know what they're buying. And that's one of the reasons behind the whole success of mince and meatballs and kebabs. It's the same time and time and time again. It's convenient and something they know how to cook. Now, hands up here who in this room watches cooking programs. Right? Keep your hands up if you've ever cooked something from a cooking program. Yeah, that's about right. I watch them all the time and I can't cook to save myself, and I've never gone near a cooker. And the point being, actually, a lot of the time, consumers react against new things because they don't know what to do with them. And that's a challenge, and that's one of the complicating things. Just because you put something good in front of somebody doesn't mean they're going to buy it. Secondly, what does the retailer want? Well, number one, they want profit, because they have to answer to a board of shareholders, and they have to provide a return. If they don't, the board of directors is out. So profit is number one. And we need to acknowledge that. Profit is not a dirty word. Profit is important in all forms of business. They want the perfect supply chain. And that covers everything from a story, to integrity, to good eating quality, to consumer messages, etc., etc. They need and want the perfect supply chain. Now, I'm talking about retailers here, but this could very much apply elsewhere as well to the export trade. It's probably easier to demonstrate here. They want consistent eating quality, and they want long life and low wastage. There's something that people really never regularly consider. I'm just noticing actually as well that the fonts have changed in this, so apologies for things that are hiding behind pictures. But rate of sale is very linked at times to shelf loading. So if you put a lot of product on the shelf, it will sell quicker. But if you put a lot of product on the shelf, it will also waste quicker, or more will go to waste. So if you can get longer life, you can actually get more product on, you can sell more with a similar wastage rate. And that's actually very, very important. What do we want as processors then? Essentially, we want profitability again. And through that, we want a consistent and planned supply of livestock. And we want the correct specification of stock. And just to give you one or two little photographs there, there's still an awful lot of product that probably is not ideally suited for what the customer wants. You can see the differences there, for instance, on the bottom left there, of different sizes and different classifications of steer. On the right, you can see the difference on sort of the fat class. And when you, particularly on lamb, break that down to taking a lot of fat off, say a 4 versus a 3, you're talking about a doubling in waste and an extra 1.5 kilos on a lamb that's already cost, say, for example, £4. And that's a fair chunk out of the value of a lamb. And that type of thing is really, really important, because actually it impacts very much on our profitability and what the farmer wants as well. So what does the farmer want? And I've put question marks here because it's really down to you. What do you want? Do you want profit? Because if that's not number one for you, please don't complain when it doesn't happen. Profit has to be up there. Sustainability, ongoing profitability, more security, don't know, a better lifestyle, I don't know. You have to answer that question for yourselves. But it's very, very important to have a bit of a think about it. So the question for me is then, how do we square the circle? And we're back to Northern Ireland again, if we can actually get that thing working. There it is. Two happy-looking men there, who would have happily choked each other quite a number of years ago. But actually, ultimately, did they get what they wanted? Probably not. Neither of them ideally what they wanted. They became known in Northern Ireland, by the way, as the Chuckle Brothers. Don't know if you knew that or not. But they had a lot of personal chemistry. But ultimately, it came from saying everybody has to give a bit. In a perfect world, everybody gets everything perfectly all the time. This is not a perfect world. So everybody has to give a bit. And they did, to a large extent, subsume personal aims for the common good. And ultimately, they prioritised the goals that they saw were important. They eventually did look back and say, hang on, something's got to change here. We can't go on. This has to change, and they did. So the question for me then is this. We're struggling here now with this. There we go. What does your commercial partner need? Who is your commercial partner? It could be a number of people, but what is their market? So how can you help them to fulfill what their customer needs? And it's all about shaping your business to focus on that customer. Be that customer an export customer or an internal customer. And we need both. Both are important. How do you match your goals to theirs so that you ultimately get what you want? And there's all sorts of debates we can have around that. But fundamentally, these are the key points as I see them. What are the pinch points in that supply chain? On the farmer side, you're looking at this uncertainty, fluctuating prices up and down, fluctuating feed prices, the distorting effect of CAP. You're then looking at other things like seasonal supply effects for the processor, massive amounts at one point, less at another point, perhaps when we don't need it, and other times when we do need it, it's not there. Something has to change there, that's important. Impact of variable carcasses, you've seen something that happens there. The impact of weather, because as the sun comes out, so the change in demand really hits us. So you've got things like burgers and mince and meatballs just go through the roof whenever the sun's out, and whenever the sun's not out, it's through the floor. And how do you manage that very variable demand? Promotional volume is really important too, because whenever you get a good promotion going, you can have 6 times, 8 times that volume of product sold. So say you're producing 1,000 or 2,000 cattle a week, you suddenly need in that week demand for 6,000 or 12,000 loins. How do you meet that or match that? That's an issue. As you move on to the retailer then, or to your customer, you're looking at price competition. It is a jungle out there. It's very difficult. There's a lot of people competing for the same market space, and if you go to somewhere like Australia, the competition is not the same. And interestingly enough, their farmers getting a much worse price than ours, and the supermarkets are making 2 or 3 times as much money proportionally to turnover. Got to ask yourself a question there about competition and things as well. But weather effects, wastage and theft. Now I'm saying theft isn't hugely in control of the supermarket, but they do try to bring that back down a bit. But ultimately, here's the point for you that's key as well, and that brings it back to our cost of production. Substitutionary effects are massive in the meat sector. It's not like milk. If I want milk, I've got soya milk or milk. I'm not terribly fond of soya milk, I have to be honest with you, so it's not an alternative for me. But I've got chicken, pork, I've got beef, I've got lamb, and even some of the more exotic stuff out there. If people don't like your price for what you're charging for your product, they'll go somewhere else and they'll do something else. And that's why there's a constant pressure on you. Do not have a captive market. We don't have a captive market. Really key. Ultimately then down to the consumer, their budget, what they're expecting you to provide them. Do they know what to do with it? Back to that point again. And finally, all the other product quality attributes, life, taste, etc., ease even of preparation and things. Lots of pinch points there we can address. So ultimately, these are the focal points as I see them. We need a planned supply of livestock at the ideal specifications, at a sustainable price, so that stores or your customer can sell large amounts of product with minimum wastage and give maximum customer satisfaction, so that the customer enjoys the experience and comes back time and again to buy your product. Because if they don't like it, they're not coming back. And that's pretty key as I would see it. Here's the next bit. I've just travelled to Wales over the weekend there with my children in the car, and it was delightful. There wasn't a raised voice and all the rest of it, and any of you who know the kids, have kids, know that's not true. It was he punched me, he nipped me, he did this, he did that, and it ultimately ends up, would you just all shut up? I'm not interested. And ultimately, this is something we have to say about our business as well. I do a lot of farmers' meetings. I do a lot of other meetings. And often we're challenged about what are we doing for the farmer? What are we doing? We have a responsibility as a processor, but equally as well, every one of us has a responsibility to take responsibility for our own businesses. Change what you can change. Go for the best market you can go for, and then move on with it. Don't blame somebody else, because ultimately there's a limited amount that you can do about it. So we need to focus on some things. Change the things we can change. Don't waste energy on things you can't do anything about. There's a difficult one there. As a beef processor, we'd be very keen for our finishers in particular to obtain better stock from breeding farms. But that's a really difficult one. As you go back into the chain, it starts and building links right down to the very start, to sucker producers, to dairy farmers. And it's difficult, but it needs to be done at some stage. The second one is much more within your control, maximising efficiency on farm. And Alan hit all the points I wanted to hit earlier on. The difference between the best and the worst is massive. It's absolutely massive. And as we move on to one or two examples, I can show you some of the things that make a difference. The other one then is just building commercial relationships. That's fairly obvious. But the challenges against that really are, at the minute, this is, generally speaking, a chain that has low profitability. And actually doing new things is risky. So if we, as a processor, offer you a contract, if it goes even slightly wrong, there's a big risk associated. So we have to be kind of sure of what we're doing before we actually do it. And equally, it's the same for yourselves. Can you afford to invest $300,000 in something that will greatly improve your efficiency whenever price might be all over the place next year? We need to break that somehow. The issue really on red meat more than anything else is to do with balance. Because it's not like milk, where milk is milk is milk, and then it's kind of all sold in one lot. Typically on a lamb, we'll sell 100% of legs, 80% of loin, 30-40% of shoulder to a retailer, and the rest will be sent into different markets. And that makes creating a contract much more difficult. Now, I do believe it's coming. I think there's a change. I think there's a change in farmers' attitude. I think there's a change right across the chain. I think it's coming, but it's slow. And there's your other challenge again, back to something you can control. Really highly variable on-farm performance. And here's something as well that Alan talked about. I promise I haven't seen Alan's presentation, but I was very grateful for it. Number one, we have to recognise that we can't make profit all the time. No business will make profit all the time. Part of being in business is the fact that there's a bit of risk involved. We need to take a longer term view. But if you're not profitable, and we're not profitable over a 3 to 5 year period, there's a bit of a problem. And the question is, what are you doing about it? What are we doing about it in our business? Each party in the chain has to take some risk. So even when we talk about longer term, if contracts come in and things, it's not a total transfer of risk from one party to the other. Everyone has to take an element of risk. But it's about smoothing out that volatility, and that's coming as well. So the question is, how do we change? Well, ultimately it comes down to data. I want to tell you about a farmer. This may or may not be a true story. I'll leave it up to your imagination, but he'd had a bad accident, and these things happen. And he was lying in hospital, sort of wrapped up to nine, sort of lying there, and his wife was sitting there holding his hand. Might have been hurting him slightly, but he was grateful for her presence. And he looked up at her and he smiled and said, "You're a great wife." And she smiled and said, "I am." And he says, you were there actually when I had that other tractor accident. And she says, "I was." She says, "You were there when the house burned down?" He says, Yeah, I was, and you were there with me too." He says, "You were there actually whenever the business went under and, we were homeless?" And he says, "I was there for you too." He says, and you were here whenever I had this accident as well?" "Yes. And he looked up and he said, "I think you're bad luck. You won't leave me alone." And the issue here is that actually change must be based on data and not perception. Believe it or not, as you look at that diagram on the right there, those are all straight lines. It is provable. You can check it later if you want, but they're all straight lines. And it's all about actually taking some data, and instead of just taking perception, I talk to a lot of farmers who are really pleased that they topped the market. They never ever tell you about the other three that actually slipped under the radar somewhat. And we're all programmed to look really at maybe ourselves in a better light than we should. And ultimately, we have to use data. And when we have that data, we have to have a goal. And when we're going to use that goal to help us change, we need to actually value that goal. So if you don't value a change, it ain't going to happen. Simple as. So does it provide finance for you? Does it save labour? Does it improve the product? What is it about that change that's going to make your business better? Because if it's not, don't do it. Change for change's sake is pointless. It also has to be deliverable and broken down, and it has to have the right people involved. Attitude is important, and we'll touch on that in a wee minute again. But here's the bit that you must do. If you don't do this, you're not operating a proper business. I have to be honest with you. If you don't measure, again, my little screen has gone, but on the left that says collect data, analyze data, compare data, and interpret data. I would say, firstly, without measurement, we just don't know. If you don't measure something, you have no idea. You really don't. Without analysing it, then you can't understand it. It's just a data set that's sitting there. And then without comparing, how do you know how you compared against last year, against your neighbour, against industry best? If you don't do that, it's a problem. And without interpreting, then, we can't address those targets. And here's the bit as it brings it back down to my Nuffield then, quite quickly. We have to learn. But everyone can learn. And one of the things that I've come across time and time again as you go around, a lot of farmers in particular feel as if they don't learn. They maybe weren't particularly academic, they didn't do this, and they almost bury themselves by what they feel they can't do. But everybody can do it. It's just how you do it. And the key bit for me is learning in a way that you can do yourself. So education through seeing, just practical demonstrations on different farms. I noticed Duncan talking about that earlier on. You're going to focus farms to see what's done there. Getting a wee view of who's doing what well, really important. There are many, many great websites, some of them related to agriculture, by the way, and you can learn an awful lot. You wouldn't necessarily believe everything you hear or see on them, but things like video education, learning techniques for farming, perhaps less important than going to a farm, but what about consumer advice and understanding what your customer's buying, your customer's wanting? What are we looking at some websites or Twitter feeds on customer reaction to beef? There's lots and lots of things you can learn yourself, and there's no embarrassment in that. Just go and look yourself and get a real feel for who your customer is and what they're saying. And ultimately, it come down to this. As I looked at lots and lots of different businesses, a business is going wrong if it's not collecting performance data. If you're sitting here today and you're not collecting performance data, your business is going wrong. You're also ideally, in an ideal world, you're going wrong as well if you're not comparing that to benchmarks. Who's better than me and how can I learn? There's no embarrassment in that. In my company, I'm better than people at a lot of things, but I'm also substantially worse at a lot of things. There's no embarrassment in that. That's people's abilities and different things. But you can try and improve, and that's really important. If you haven't set goals, it's a problem. And the other thing is this here at the bottom, well hidden. Clearly, I haven't made use of new findings in technology terribly well with this presentation. I promise you it looked all right earlier on. But it isn't making use of, you're not making use of sort of new techniques, new technology, even to make data collection easier. It's a bit of a problem for you. So simple as this here, business is mainly in the detail, and detail is hard. If you're not prepared to sweat it, you're not going to succeed. And actually, it was very interesting watching the British performance director of cycling talking during the Olympics when the French accused him of cheating. If you can't win, accuse your opponent of cheating, obviously. And he said there is no cheating involved in British cycling. It is simply the aggregation of small details that lead into a big performance benefit. And that's what I've seen as I've gone around quite a number of different farms. The performance director of British Cycling wouldn't even let athletes take their own pillows or use the hotel pillows. They had to bring their own pillows in case they got sick from somebody else's thing. That's just attention to detail, and that's the type of thing you have to do. That wasn't me, honest. But here's some interesting, just different case studies that I've been through before we draw this to conclusion. This is a guy in Northern Ireland. One of the interesting things was that as I went around, and it really encouraged me, and I'm going to say this again, some of the best farms are in the UK. It's really quite heartening to see that. Some of the highest performing and best people are here. And we don't need to go a million miles to see good performance. This guy is a small farm. He's an ex-pig farmer. He actually is as far west as you can get in the UK. Sticks out into Southern Ireland, which happens to be in the west on this occasion. But he's focused on best practice on everything. And he started with one thing and added others and added others and added others. And over a period of time, he, for instance, focused on lambing percentage and lifted his lambing percentage from about 154 to about 195 or 200 now. Depends on the season, obviously. He really works his grassland. And you walk that farm, there's virtually no weed at all, just because he puts a lot of attention to it. And ultimately, he then focused on breeding and selection of the ewe flock. And one of the key things in this here is he cut out the bottom first. He didn't focus on breeding from the best. He thought, I'll take out my worst performers. And by taking out the worst performers, the progress you make is immense. And it's a very simple thing that everybody in this room can do if you record. If you don't, you have no idea what the bad or the good performers are. But fundamentally, this guy has made a difference just by doing really simple things. The other thing he did there, he focused on the market. Lots of guys are very keen on heavy lambs. Heavy lambs make money, blah, blah, blah. But if they don't sell to the right customer, you've got a problem. So that instead of going for heavier lambs, he has actually reduced his conformation and actually produced more smaller lambs, which are more suited for market. And guess what? He's making more money. And it's a really, really interesting study to look at. And anybody in this room can do that. Moving on. Another interesting, completely different commercial organisation. This is Beef Products Incorporated in the USA. You'll have heard of the pink slime. These are the guys that were actually doing that. But the problem with that is it was actually a very good product. It was simply centrifuged lean meat off of fat. There was nothing wrong with it. And suddenly these guys that built a business in this, it's knocked over through really no fault of their own. And they're suddenly finding, I have to close 3 factories out of 4. What would you do? Would you just close the doors and go home? This guy didn't. He said, right, well, I'm going to fight this. So he's got a lawsuit going, but he just started to build his business up again. And he went for it. And he looked for a different product that customers would want. That on the bottom right there is a product actually that is marbled beef. It's actually injected with other beef fat to make it look marbled. Terrific flavour in it, very, very good. But it's about trying to supply a catering market there that wanted that. Now, you might disagree or agree with what they're trying to do there, but he's market focused and he's producing something and he's not letting people get him down. And you see, back to Isaac's farm there a minute. Isaac has only 75 acres and 500 ewes and almost actually just over 1,000 lambs coming off that this year. Very tiny farm. So he didn't say, oh, I'm constrained by land, can't do anything, there we go. He said, I will make the best of what I have. And he went on with it. Next thing, this guy, I will make the best of what I have. Life's dealt me a rough hand here. I'm going for it anyway. And that was really interesting as well. And then thirdly, the headmaster. This was a really interesting one actually, because I got to thinking and looking at this. If you look at what a headmaster has to do, you've got budgetary constraints, you've got staff management there, you've got the need to focus on the customer, you're dealing with an unpredictable asset, which is your children, by the way. And looking at this room, I would say there were a few unpredictable assets at school here, so there were. But what they have done, this is actually in a very difficult area of Belfast, and this is true. Christmas is cheap because all they do is put the order in with the shoplifter. And it's that type of a place. They used to play tag with hatchets. And it's a very difficult place where people just have no interest. Parents have no interest in the children's education. It's just childcare. Get them out of the way so that I can sit at home. No interest. The biggest problem he has is the parents. So what does he do? He sit back and say, I'm dealt a rough hand here. This is miserable. I keep my head down and I'll do my day job and that's it. No. He sat down and started to target a lot of the root causes. And back to what Alan was saying, what are the root causes of the problems in your business? In this case, it was lack of parental interest. So we started things like games evenings with the children and parents. He started actually a read your child a story. Believe it or not, none of people in one class had actually ever read their children a story. None of them had ever played a game with their children. One or two other classes were slightly different, but much the same. And he said, what's the root cause of the problem? I'm going to deal with it. And one of the interesting things about my study has just been seeing how other people in different industries deal with essentially similar set of criteria that we have to deal with. Nothing they can do about it outside that. Just deal the hand you're dealt and get on with it. And the other thing that's really was quite annoying for him is he has an assessment against much more privileged schools. And he's sort of looking at that and saying, guys, it's not fair. But he's got no choice. He needs to get on with it. And it was really interesting just seeing how he approached it. And lastly, this is the last one before we draw to a conclusion on one or two things. Dairy Australia was interesting because there's a lot of research talent even in this room as I look around. And a lot of times, and I have done this, and I've been guilty of it, of starting research without really an end game. How are we going to roll this out? How are we going to get it going? And Dairy Australia is funny or interesting because they have seen the same problem and actually are now starting to plan research around the extension to make sure that if we're doing this, we can get it out. It doesn't matter if it's the best project in the world. If we can't implement it, forget it. And I took that very clearly from this guy here. And he was just looking and said, you know, $1 earned at the farm causes 6 others to be earned elsewhere in the chain. I thought that was very interesting as well. So promote farming, push farming, you actually bring other industries along with it as well, and you promote jobs, and that's a key message too. I'll just move on now if that'll do it. So the question is, what do they all have in common? Number one, the customer is king. It doesn't matter if it's affecting your business or threatening your business. I'm going to defend where I am. This is what I do. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, the customer is king. You can't argue with 60 million people. Really. Well, you can argue all you like, but you'll not make any difference. It's really important that you actually focus on what they want. And that says, by the way, we waited 30 minutes, no service, just in case anybody can't read it at the back. Produce what the customer wants, not what is easiest. Because customers actually don't compromise. They're not prepared to compromise, and actually you pretty much aren't as well. So, ultimately, what do they do? What do all these businesses in all these different countries do that makes a difference? The first thing is they're not scared to fail. Do you know that a lot of what you're going to do is going to fall in a heap, as it does with me? But actually, a lot of it isn't going to fall in a heap. But if you're too scared to try, you're never going to make the success, and you will ultimately just fail anyway. Also, these people have an idea where they want to get to, what they want to do with their businesses, and they go forward, and then they take criticism well. I've been in meeting after meeting where I've taken abuse at times over something I've said because people feel it's a personal insult. It's not. It's an observation on all of our businesses that we have to improve, and we need to take constructive criticism. Next thing is they apply what they learn. It's no good learning loads and loads of stuff and not doing it. And here's a really key bit. They put in the work to get there. It's hard. Business is hard. The detail is hard. But you have to put the work in. If you're not prepared to put the work in, just forget it now and go and do something else. It's as simple as that. They also deal with all aspects of their businesses, but they deal with the weaknesses first. So what are the conclusions then as we get to the end here? Most of the best farms I've actually come across have been in the UK, but we have an exceptionally long tail, a frighteningly long tail. And it's really important that we try and deal with that as a community. The second thing is this, that the people are actually the most important and the most inspiring aspects of the business. No matter what you've been dealt, your farm will not be ideal. Your life will not be ideal. Your business will not be ideal. But play with what you've got. Have the right attitude and go forward. Really important. Problems will come, but there is a formula for success. And it's actually attention to detail and hard work. It's really as simple as that. So, ultimately, conclusions. It isn't rocket science. Those farms that I have seen, anybody can do it. Anybody. But are you prepared to go and find out how to do it? Measure performance, learn from others, apply what you know, and get the detail right. And remember this, it's mainly down to your attitude. Miserable beggars need not apply. It's as simple as that. So I was trying to think of a very heartwarming story to finish with, and I've got one to show you actually. And I was thinking about it for a while, and it seemed vaguely familiar. And essentially what it's saying is, very small changes can make a big difference over time. And I couldn't work out why it was so familiar to me, but actually, when I got to it, I actually realised it's Phil Hadley. So the thing that I kind of want to leave you with there at the end of the day is that small daily improvements, start with something. Those small changes are the key to staggering long-term results. And I'm not going to ask them to come and pose in any way at all. But please remember that attention to detail, hard work will get you a long way. So thank you very much.